Hi there, everyone. Mychal A. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology. And today I'd like to talk to you about the topic of solar returns. So for those of you who don't know, at Oraculos, solar returns are the bread and butter of our predictive astrological offerings. And if you want to find out more about what we offer at Oraculos, please feel free to visit our website at www.oraculosastrology.com. But I really want to talk about solar returns in particular because solar returns really represents the beginning of predictive astrology that we teach at Oraculos. So our curriculum of professional astrological training starts with the foundations of classical astrology. And we have our next Foundations of Classical Astrology course coming up this September 2022. So if you want to get in on it, please feel free to check that out on our website as well. But then after the Foundations of Classical Astrology, or FOCA, we go into a series of semesters called the Practice of Concrete Astrology. The Practice of Concrete Astrology 1 covers concrete natal astrology. So everything that an aspiring astrologer needs to know about how to begin a natal astrology practice, which ultimately boils down to how to read a natal astrology chart in a concrete, traditional way, is what we learn in PCA 1. But right after PCA 1, we go into PCA 2, which is the practice of concrete predictive astrology, because these things just naturally follow. So if you know how to speak about a natal chart from a concrete perspective, then naturally the next thing that evolves out of that is to talk about how that chart progresses through time. And maybe I shouldn't use the term progresses because that term progression or progresses has a very particular meaning in astrology. But it's important for us to know, how does the destiny of a person that is contained within their chart move and unfold through time? Our natal charts at a very basic level, they give us the general shape or the structure of the concrete experiences that we have within our lives and the person who we become as a result of those experiences. So at Oraculos, we practice what is called concrete astrology because even though our astrology does give an understanding or an awareness of the soul and the psyche and the personality of the person who's receiving the reading, ultimately, we also want to know about the concrete events that are occurring within that person's life that cause them to become who they are. And at Oraculos, is not just a belief of ours, but it's also an experience of ours that the concrete events that create and form a specific approach to life that a person portrays through their personality, all of those concrete events are held as deeply within the fabric of one's natal chart, just as the personality of that person is. What we see in astrology as astrology changed hands at the turn of the century from more concrete carriers of this tradition to more psychological carriers of this tradition is an emphasis on the psychological factor of delineating the personality of a person from their birth chart, more so than speaking clearly and specifically about the concrete events that that birth chart represents. And if a birth chart represents anything at all, it most assuredly also must represent the lay of the land that we all experience within this lifetime. Not only who are we as we move through this world, but what worlds do we find ourselves moving through individually? These are the things that we find within our birth chart. We find the voyager or the traveler, who is the person themselves for whom that birth chart belongs. And we also find the extent of their journey. We find the extent of their voyages also represented within their chart, which reminds me of a quote that I heard some years back where someone said, "It doesn't matter how far in the world you go, you will always only find yourself." And the reason why we always only find ourselves is because it doesn't matter if we change our environment. It doesn't matter if we change the reality of our physical location. At the end of the day, the self that you carry with you through life is a self that is deeply imprinted within your soul and psyche, and that same self is reflected within your natal chart. So that's the premise of most of traditional astrology, that we are who we are, and we experience the concrete things that we experience because those concrete things that we experience were written in the stars from the day of our first breath. And the skillful astrologer has the ability not just to interpret what our destinies are within this lifetime through an interpretation of our natal chart, but the skillful astrologer also has the ability to interpret how that natal chart is unfolding throughout time and how ultimately each year of a life of a person serves as a further unfolding of the promise that we are all born into this life with. And at Oraculos, we call that promise the natal promise. This brings us to the topic of the solar return, and why and how the solar return has always been such a vital part of traditional astrological practice. The solar return chart is the chart of the exact moment when the transiting sun returns to the location of your natal sun on an annual basis. Within traditional astrology, our understanding of this chart is that this chart holds within itself the ability to predict the concrete events that we will experience within our lives within that year. That is what the solar return chart is. And this ability to predict the concrete events that a solar return chart holds comes first of all from our ability to practice concrete natal astrology in a concrete, specific, and an organized way, which is why at Oraculos, our syllabus of education is built in this way so that astrologers, by the time as they become ready for the practice of concrete prediction, they are already in a place where they're basing their concrete predictive practice on a very thorough and deep and rigorous traditional astrology concrete natal practice. You can't predict what isn't already there within the natal chart, which is why, from a pedagogical perspective, knowing how to understand a natal chart inside and out is such a vital tool if we're going to practice predictive astrology. Because another quote that exists within the predictive astrological world is, "Nothing promised, nothing given." If something is not first promised within your natal chart, no solar return chart will give it. No lunar return chart will give it. No secondary direction will give it. No primary direction will give it, because nothing promised, nothing given. What this says is that there is a fundamental magnetism of destiny that exists within all of us that is reflected within our natal charts, and that magnetism of destiny is what magnetizes the specific concrete events that we have within our lives to us, because nothing promised, nothing given. With that as our basis, we see that the solar return chart only serves to unravel the natal promise throughout time. Now, there are many ways that solar return charts are used within the 21st century, and at Oraculos, we tend to be very narrow in our approach to astrology, and rightfully so, because the sheer amount of opinions that exist within the world on any given topic of astrology is staggering. And very often, one of the places where the neophyte astrologer goes wrong is that they find themselves in a world of endless astrological information. And they feel as if in order for them to become a good astrologer, they have to know it all. But that's not our approach at Oraculos. Our approach at Oraculos is we know a few things in a very deep and a very thorough and a very profound sort of way, because we do not need to know every single part of every moving part of astrology in order to practice astrology efficiently. I'm reminded of this story that I used to tell my students at the beginning of their studies at Oraculos, that if you want to be a chicken and rice maker, be the best chicken and rice maker there is. And do not think that you have to add hot dogs to that and you have to add salads to that. I mean, hopefully you're adding a salad, but don't think that you have to add hot dogs and a salad and lasagna and all of these things. Because if your intention is to really ground yourself firmly in a specific technique or in a specific group of techniques that all feed back into each other, then you should really cultivate those things primarily within yourself. Because the clearer you are on the techniques that you have, then the clearer those techniques pour out of you into your actual client work. You don't need to know everything about every fixed star. You don't need to know everything about every asteroid. You don't need to know everything about every hypothetical planet. You just need to practice good, solid, concrete astrology. So when it comes to solar returns at Oraculos, we are very narrow in the scope of the practices that we use in relationship to them. And one of the places that we really root our solar return approach is the 17th century. And within the 17th century, the person who we root our soul return practice on is Jean-Baptiste Moran. Jean-Baptiste Moran was a mathematician, a medical doctor, and an astrologer who was practicing in the 17th century. He was a contemporary of William Lilly and many of the other luminaries of Renaissance astrology who were practicing at that time. And Moran was a peculiar man with peculiar thoughts about many things and very opinionated points of view about many things. And one of the things he was quite certain about was that everything that we had been given about solar returns up until that point was bogus. Now, one has to question why is this? Why does he say that an entire tradition, hundreds of years of tradition of solar returns being utilized is bogus? And that was a question that I had to grapple with when I was working with his literature for the first time, because for me, I was practicing astrology within the context of a very specific Renaissance framework. So clearly, if you're practicing in that way, the solar returns that you practice also have to follow in that same vein. However, what we see within Moran is a very big deviation from what we see within many of the other astrologers who were his contemporaries at that time. And what we see within him is this attempt to not only systematize astrology in a very clear and specific way, but also an attempt to root all of our person-based astrology back into the natal chart. Now, this piece is the most important piece ever, and it really serves as the backbone of everything that we do at Oraculos. For him, there was no horary astrology unless that was rooted back within the natal chart. There was no electional astrology unless that was rooted back within the natal chart. And no solar return could say anything unless that was rooted back within the natal chart. So what we see within him is this going back and forth between the solar return chart and the natal chart and forcing them to have a resonance with each other and forcing them to essentially speak to each other in a way that made sense, where we could see the natal chart reflected in the solar return chart, and where we could also see the solar return chart reflected back in the natal chart. And this approach to solar returns is a marvelous approach, in my opinion. It's something that we at Oraculos have tested time and time again over thousands of charts. And it's something that we have proven to work. That if we're going to do any predictive astrology at all, there is no way a solar return chart can stand in isolation to the actual natal chart from which it arose. Which is why traditionally we call the natal chart the radix, because radix is a Latin word from which the word root is derived. Your natal chart is the root chart. Anything you're going to do for yourself, whether it's electional astrology or predictive astrology, has to come back to that natal chart, because if it is not rooted in the natal chart, then these other charts read in isolation really mean nothing at all specifically to you. This ties into a larger issue that we find in astrology that I'm not going to really talk too much on, but there is a notion within astrology today that there can be electional astrology, or the choosing of auspicious times, period. That we could choose an auspicious time for the entire world to do a particular action based on what's going on within the astrology of the moment at this moment. But when we look in Renaissance astrology, we find no astrologer actually saying that, because all astrologers writing within the Renaissance period, or at least all of the astrologers who I've surveyed from that period, all say that any electional astrology at all, if it is to be valid, it has to be rooted back within your natal chart. Because what's good for the goose is most assuredly not good for the gander. And an auspicious period for one person may be an awful period for somebody else, because the planets that are forming that auspicious period mean a good thing for one person, but those same planets mean a completely debilitating thing for somebody else. So there is this demand that we see coming out of Jean-Baptiste Moran for all of us to find a way to plug ourselves back into the cosmos before having the cosmos plug itself universally into us. Because anything that we draw down into our lives from the cosmos has to be brought into harmony with what is. And what is for everyone is what is within their natal chart. So back to the solar return. The solar return chart is purely a reflection and an unfolding of what we find within the natal chart. And it represents concrete events that happen within our lives on an annual basis. Now, there are subdivisions of solar return charts. If you want to isolate a particular period or a particular season within a solar return chart, then you can choose a solar return chart to represent that period. So in general, we have the solar return chart, which represents our destiny for a coming year. But a solar return chart can be divided into a quartile solar return chart, in which we are chopping up our year into seasonal segments of 3 months each. So if a year has 12 months, your quartile solar return chart is going to chop up your solar return into 3-month segments to represent how the destiny that's reflected in the major solar return chart is going to manifest in each of those 3-month periods. So when we use quartile solar return charts, we're looking at the primary solar return chart to represent our destiny for the entire year, but specifically to really designate what will happen to us within the first 3 months of our year. Then we have a chart that we cast 3 months after that, and that chart is going to represent the next 3-month period. And naturally, if we draw 4 of them, then the last solar return chart within that series is going to represent the solar return chart for the next year. So technically speaking, there should only be 3 solar return charts from that. The main one, then the one that we get at the first square when that sun squares itself, then the opposition one, and then the final solar return chart within that series is going to be our solar return for the coming year. Then the second type of solar return chart we can have is a Demi solar return chart. And Demi means half. So if we are using a Demi solar return chart, then you have the primary solar return chart that specifically represents your destiny for the entire year. And then the Demi solar return chart is a chart that we cast 6 months into the year, and that represents what the final portion of the year looks like in terms of the telling of that destiny. Then from there, the next possibility that we have is called the 12th harmonic solar return chart. And the 12th harmonic solar return chart allows us to see what our year looks like on a monthly basis. So this one is a really cool one because it gives us the ability to cast a predictive chart for the month ahead by taking our year and cutting it into 12 segments. So if, for example, you're born on the 1st of June, and your solar return chart for this year is also on the 1st of June, then your 12th harmonic solar return chart will be 30 days later, when the sun has moved exactly 30 degrees away from where it was on the first day of your actual first solar return chart, or the main solar return chart for the entire year. And collectively, all of these different types of solar return charts represent a concrete way to predict the events that are going to unfold within our lives within the span of time for which that chart is designated. Now, one of the things that we find in solar return doctrine today is there's a big discussion going on in astrology about, well, where do we cast our solar return chart for to begin with? Do we cast our solar return chart for our natal location, or do we cast our solar return chart for some other location? Jean-Baptiste Moran, writing in the 17th century, said that we should cast our solar return chart based on the location for where we are at that moment of that solar return. Now, this is something that the 21st century has picked up whole turkey. They didn't pick up the rest of his astrology, but they picked up that one piece. And so now in modern astrology, we find this notion of people traveling on the date of their solar return to a location. So if my solar return chart in Nassau, Bahamas, where I was born, does not look the way I need for that chart to look, then I just traveled somewhere else. Maybe I traveled to New York for my solar return and have my solar return in New York so that I can, in a sense, alter my destiny or alter my fate by putting the bad stuff someplace where it won't affect me, and by highlighting the good stuff that I do want to affect me. So that's one way that people do that. And there is a whole big business about people getting a solar return chart reading every year because they want to know, where should I travel for my birthday? Where will give me the best solar return possible so that I can have the best destiny as possible within this coming solar return year? Now, for me, that seems to be a very finicky thing to do. And we don't actually see that happening anywhere within Renaissance astrology before Jean-Baptiste Moran. So while I do love a lot of his astrology, I don't love all of it. And this is one of the things that I think is problematic with his particular approach to astrology. And it's something that he rationalizes out quite well. He says that, well, the heavens can only affect you based on where you are, because you are not a ghost. Therefore, you can't expect for the heavens to affect you based on where you were when you were born if you're no longer in that location. So it seems to be a very well rationalized perspective. And at the same time, at Oraculos, we've only ever used the solar return chart for the natal location, because for me, it doesn't matter whether or not you travel to Japan or whether or not you travel to Kansas on your birthday. If you were born someplace, there is a gravity and an imprint and a psychic molding that exists within that place in relationship to you. And we can't really adjust that by choosing to move somewhere else on our birthday. So at Oraculos, all of our solar return work is done based on the natal location. And we have a very high batting average in terms of accuracy from solar returns that we use in that manner. We don't interpret solar return charts psychologically. We interpret solar return charts in a very concrete way. And we speak about very concrete things from those solar return charts. And at this point, I feel like if there was something broken within that, we would have seen that by our 100th solar return chart. And we're pretty much far beyond that at this point, and we still find that this works. So that's what we do. You could do whatever you like to do, but I think in terms of creating a sense of a consistency and a sense of a control, and also a sense of just things making sense in astrology. You know, if you were born in a location and if your destiny is completely predicated on that location where you were born, then your solar return chart probably also is going to respond most strongly if you cast that chart for your birth location than if you were to go somewhere else. So that is my spiel on solar returns for today, and I'm going to open the floor for questions. Barbara.
Yes, I've got a question. We got a very helpful and clear rubric for horary and natal charts. Will you give us the same for solar returns?
Definitely, Barbara. So at Oraculos, our favorite word is rubric. We have a rubric for everything. We have a rubric for how to start learning astrology. We have a rubric for how to stop learning astrology. We have a rubric for horary, natal, electional, mundane, everything. And as far as solar returns are concerned, we also have a pretty clear rubric for how to work with solar return charts. So definitely, that exists. And for those of you who want to study and learn how to use astrology in a more concrete and event-based way, which happens to be a dying ability in astrology. There is a lot of psychological astrology in the world. There is a lot of emotional release, feel-good astrology in the world, but the ability to predict things and the ability to speak from a chart in a concrete way is a dying skill. So if this is a skill that you want to learn, then please feel free to sign up for our upcoming 2-year Excellence in Astrology program this coming September 2022, so that you can learn all of the requisite skills necessary in order to interpret solar return charts and all astrology charts in a very concrete and specific way.
Okay, so this is maybe you're not going to be able to answer this all now. We need to actually go to your course, but I'm trying to see how we would root it in the radix. And are we using the lordship of the radix and then looking at the planets as they are those lords based on the radix and their aspects and where they are? Is that how it's done?
That is a very good question, and you are correct. You definitely need to do PCA2 in order to really understand that fully. But for all intents and purposes, when it comes to interpreting a solar return chart at Oraculos, we pull up the two charts side by side. We do not look at the solar return chart as a bi-wheel because the solar return chart stands on its own. And so we pull up those two charts side by side and we compare the two charts to each other. And more specifically, we compare the solar return chart to the natal chart. And we do this by first locating where the solar return ascendant falls within the natal chart, because that gives us some understanding of what the major theme is going on for that person within that year. And then the next thing that we do from there is we begin to look and see what is happening to that ascendant within the natal chart. So is that ascendant conjunct a planet in the natal chart? Is that ascendant picking up a very strong and tight aspect from another planet within the natal chart? We begin to do that because the more aspects that ascendant, i.e. the solar return ascendant, picks up from within the natal chart, the more that ascendant is plugging into our natal story and touching on various aspects of our natal promise. And after we've taken into consideration the planets that solar return ascendant is having a relationship to in the natal chart, we then want to see what relationships is that solar return ascendant having within the solar return chart. So which aspects is that solar return ascendant picking up from within the solar return chart? And we go back and forth between these two charts in this manner. We do the same thing for the ruler of the solar return ascendant. Where does it fall within the natal chart? What aspects is it picking up? Where does it fall within the solar return chart? What aspects is it picking up? And ultimately, as we go back and forth between these two charts, that back and forth starts to slow down until we shake off the dross or the unnecessary things that don't really matter. And we really begin to isolate a very clear image of a concrete event that's unfolding within the life of that person for that year. So it does require this maddening going back and forth. But if astrology is going to say something, it's going to say it a bajillion ways. And as a result of that, we start to notice themes that start to arise as a result of that back and forth process. And those themes become clearer and clearer. And that vacillation slows down more and more until we come to a still point of what is actually going to concretely manifest within the life of this person within the coming year. And a good solar return reading should give you bullet points of the concrete things that are going to be manifesting within your life within a given year. And then we begin to use the other tools within our Oraculos Predictive Astrology suite in order to confirm or corroborate or clarify the things that the solar return chart says. And some of those things include the embolismic lunation chart, which is another type of return chart, the converse solar return chart, which is another version of the same solar return chart, but moving it backwards in time instead of forward in time, because astrologically speaking, we view a moment as having a ripple effect. That moment of your birth doesn't just ripple forward in time in terms of your solar return charts, but that moment also ripples backward in time, even prenatally before you were born. So there's the converse solar return chart that we can also use as a confirmation for what's going on for you within this given year. Then we have the primary directions and the secondary directions and the solar arc directions, and all of these tools that we have within our predictive astrology toolkit only serve to further clarify the singularity of events that's unfolding for a person within any given moment of time or within any year of that person's life. So the solar return chart is very often the basis of that. And then after that, we use our other astrological tools in order to further clarify how that prediction is manifesting and with what magnitude and strength that specific prediction is going to manifest within a person's life within a given period of time.
Okay, just as you're talking, I'm thinking about predictive techniques in general. And I think that there's some kind of a balance that we want to have, right? Like, let's find the most important thing to predict, the quality of the energy that the person on the surfboard is going to have to surf. and then go live your life. You know, I think there's only so much detail we can use in terms of that. So what do you think is the most important predictive technique? What do you think is the most important thing to look at?
That's a great question, Constance. And one of the things that is really important for me at Oraculos, and also for a number of my colleagues, I can think of several of them, is that I practice and we practice concrete astrology. And a lot of that concrete astrology is concrete event-based astrology. And so I think that that is really my specific orientation to prediction. You know, and I know that within other branches of astrology, there is this theme of, you know, what's the major themes or what's the major energies occurring within this moment. But I personally don't know how to deal in energies, and I don't really know how to deal in themes per se. But what I do practice and what I do teach is the prediction of concrete events. An example of this is I had a client who reached out to me recently via email, and she said, Mychal, I need to hop on a call with you because everything that you predicted the last time we spoke last year in November is absolutely happening, and WTF. And what was happening for her was the year before we spoke about her moving into her own home. And in that moment, I remember preparing for that reading and seeing all the things I saw. And I have no clairvoyance, so there isn't I saw things, but it's that I applied the practice of concrete predictive astrology and the skills and the rubrics associated with that to her natal chart and her solar return chart. And I saw the things that were there. And the things that were there were that her home and real estate were going to be huge issues for her within this coming year. It looked like she was going to be moving in this coming year. It looked like there would be a delay in her move this coming year. And it also looked like wherever she would be moving into, there would be water damage. Those are very concrete things. And that's something that she and I spoke about within the reading. And I really personally felt quite awful especially to talk about the water damage thing, because who wants to say that to someone who's moving into their new home, that, you know, this theme is or this thing of there being water damage is going to be a potential thing that occurs. But whatever, I said it using the skills that I know to use in order to deliver information to a person in a way that doesn't completely, you know, ruin their experience. But I gave her what was coming up truthfully, because ultimately that is a big thing. Knowing how to navigate events, concrete events that are coming up within your life is a very specific and a very necessary tool within traditional astrology. Every traditional astrologer hundreds of years ago and even currently is really primarily invested in the prediction of concrete real world events. So this client, we got on the call and she said, Mychal, you told me that there would be a delay in terms of getting into the house. I didn't get into the house in January. I got into the house in April, which was definitely not supposed to happen. You also told me that there was going to be water damage, and I made sure and I checked every single pipe and I got everything completely sealed off. And would you believe that a pipe exploded in the attic just last week? And I came downstairs to my bottom floor completely flooded in water. It was a complete mess. The whole house was flooded with water because of a pipe that bursted in the attic. And on top of that, there comes with that the fear of mold, which is a problem that she has had in several living situations that she's had before. There's been a mold situation. In one place, she got very sick from that mold situation, and it really affected her in a very detrimental way. And here again, she finds herself rehashing this story once again. Now, that is the power of predictive astrology. Clearly, from that, some of the things that I have to do as an astrologer is not just say what's going to happen or say what is most likely to happen, but also provide tools and skills and to troubleshoot the problem. You know, this is a problem that is happening. It's a recurrent problem that's happening. What is the root of the problem? How can we eradicate that root? And that's another level of astrology altogether. But at the end of the day, to your question, I feel that the solar return chart is a great tool in that regard. And that for me is usually my basis, because the solar return chart is read as a chart. And I think that that's a very important thing when it comes to predictive astrology. There are two types of predictive astrology. There is chart-based predictive astrology. And under that, you have the solar return chart, the embolismic lunation chart, the 12th harmonic solar return chart, the quartile solar return chart, the converse solar return chart, the lunar return chart, the Demi solar return chart, the converse Demi solar return chart. So within this chart-based approach to astrology, there are all of these charts that you can interpret from a predictive perspective. However, that's one branch of predictive astrology. Another type of predictive astrology is arc-based predictive astrology, in which you are casting your predictions based on the continuously moving arcs of the planets from their natal positions to other positions within the chart throughout time. Because as we know, the sky continues to move after we're born. Our birth doesn't stop the whole sky. So where do those planets continue to move after we are born, in both a literal way and a symbolic way? And that's where we get the primary directions from, which is the movement of the planets within the 24 hours after our birth. Secondary directions is the movement of the planets each day after our birth. Solar arc directions is moving all of the planets at the same speed of the sun that the sun was traveling at our birth. And so we have many, many, many styles of predictive astrology. However, for me, the solar return chart is more often than not my primary starting place. And then I move forward and backward amongst the various predictive techniques from that place. 80% of my predictive work is based on the solar return chart. And then I embellish that with the other things that serve as corroboration for what the solar return chart says. And I have a pretty good practice just doing that.
Thank you. That is really helpful. I've had solar return readings often from modern astrologers, and I don't get, when you just described the technique you were using of looking at the solar return ascendant in the natal chart, looking at the solar return Lord of the Ascendant in the natal chart and in the solar return chart, I don't think that's what modern astrologers were doing when they looked at it. And it just sounded like a bunch of interesting information that had nothing concrete, nothing even directive. You know, it was very nice to hear all their concepts.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I've heard that is a solar return technique.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always seemed like a useless thing to me, but I never had this as an idea about it. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And it's amazing how many people view solar returns in general as being useless. And I know astrologers whose feet I bow at who view the solar return as a useless technique. And a big part of that, a major problem with that, is because they are interpreting the solar return chart as a standalone chart. And you cannot interpret a solar return chart as a standalone chart if you're doing natal astrology. Everything you do from a natal perspective has to find itself rooted back within the natal horoscope. It is an imbecilic and even stupid thing to feel as if a solar return chart by itself, which is rooted on another chart, can stand separate from that other chart.
So again, everything at Oraculos is natal based.
Everything at Oraculos is natal based. If I were to teach how to make lemonade, that too would be natal based. Everything we do has to be rooted in the natal chart, because it is a stupid idea to think that you can practice things that are connected to natal astrology and not root those things back within the natal chart.
Piggybacking on what Constance just said, because I definitely had the same feeling in getting my solar return read by other astrologers, and just through my experience at Oraculos, I've learned the importance of the ascendant and the way that you treat the sun. And it might be a little misleading for people simply because it's called a solar return chart. I know it has been for me, that the sun would have this added importance. So I'm really curious to know how, and if you'd like to talk about how you would treat the leverage of the sun in a solar return chart, because I noticed you're giving more importance to the ascendant. I picked up that right away.
That's a really great question. And this is something that comes up in classes a lot, where people say, well, hey, it's a solar return chart, talk to me about the sun. And, you know, the position of the sun in the solar return chart can also be an important factor to consider. However, I feel as if the rubric that we use at Oraculos, in which we start with the ascendant, is a far more sagacious, or it's a far wiser rubric to follow than just to go to the sun. And so much of modern astrology is based on this sun situation. And I mean, clearly, it is an important factor to consider, because the sun is the giver of life. And in traditional astrology, the sun is one of the 5 hylegical points, or one of the 5 givers of life. And the 5 givers of life would be the sun, the moon, the ascendant, the midheaven, and the part of fortune. So the sun really does stand out as being of particular importance. However, what we find in traditional astrology is that the sun's importance is minimized than the importance that it's given in modern astrology. In modern astrology, the sun is the bread and the butter. We start at the sun, we go to the sun, everything is based on the sun. In traditional astrology, the sun holds importance by being the sun, but it does not hold importance as being the first thing to consider within delineation. The ascendant, traditionally, is always going to be a more personal factor to consider than the sun, unless, of course, the sun is the ruler of that ascendant, because a person has Leo rising, and therefore the sun has become important for that reason. Otherwise, the sun is simply a ruler of a house. And otherwise, the sun is simply the significator of the house that it rules, and not much more than that. And I say that with a grain of salt, because there's this whole doctrine also of triplicity rulers that's completely based around the sun and the moon, and that's another topic for another day. But in general, the sun is purely a significator, or a ruler of whatever house it rules, which is whatever house cusp Leo falls on. And the sun does not really occupy the center of our attention from a delineative perspective as it does in modern astrology. So in solar returns, we care far more about the ascendant, just because that's the orientation of traditional astrology in any event. Traditional astrology is that you start at the first house and you make your way around the chart in the counterclockwise manner. first house, second house, third house. That is how you give a reading in traditional astrology. There's no, you start with your south node or your north node, and you start with your Pluto, and you start with your whatever. These things just don't make sense from a traditional astrology perspective, because the ascendant is always going to be the most personal thing to you, traditionally speaking. And then you could put on top of that your Pluto and your South Node and your whoever and whatever. But the point is that our entry point, because everything has to have an entry point, everything has to have a beginning. And our beginning in traditional astrology, more often than not, is the ascendant. We learn that from horary astrology. We drag those skills with us unwillingly into natal astrology, because when we come to natal astrology, the first thing we want to talk about is our sun. Or maybe you've been trained elsewhere and the first thing you want to talk about is your Pluto. So we unwillingly use those same horary skills and say, no, 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 no Pluto around here. We will go and do the same thing we did in horary in natal with a few adjustments. And we take those same skills with a few more adjustments to our predictive astrology, because everything has to show its imprint. And everything has to show its lineage. And so what we do at Oraculos and what we teach at Oraculos is a clear system that shows a clear lineage. When you reach PCA 45, which I know for Lindsay and Ebony, they're on the long road with me. So when you reach PCA 45 at Oraculos, you should still be able to detect the lineage of everywhere you came from right back down to Foca. You understand? And in that way, the ascendant becomes the centralizing factor within our predictive astrology model insofar as solar returns are concerned. And after you've done all of your things, if the sun is standing out as doing something particularly important, then by all means, you go to that sun and you milk that sun for every dollar it's worth. However, it should not be a first consideration. It shouldn't even be the third consideration. It should come after following a systematic rubric of working the ascendant back and forth between the two charts and continuing down that particular path.
Perfect. I'm happy to see that consistent stream. That's great. Yeah, it's concise, it's clean.
It is concise and it's clean, which is a hallmark of an Oraculos School of Astrology education. Any other questions?
Because I'm looking at my solar return for this upcoming year and I have all these questions now. It looks very intense. When we're doing the comparison, does the significance of the lordship in the radix hold in the new chart? Yes, you answered that. But then do we also take in the lordship of the solar return?
I love this so much. And the reason I love this is because when you talk about any technique in astrology, it is guaranteed that people will automatically pull out their chart to see how that technique is playing out within their specific charts. I'm guilty of it. It's a thing that happens. However, Jennifer.
I have to go to the class. No, and I will. I can't wait. But my birthday happens before then, or my solar return.
Okay, well, listen, the point is that the question that you asked requires a lot more of explanation, and it requires really laying out the technique in a specific way, which I will most definitely be doing when we arrive in PCA 2. But to give you some ability to begin, when we look at a solar return chart, if the solar return ascendant is having relationships to planets within your natal chart, then you do want to see what do those planets rule natally. And then after you've discovered what those planets rule natally, when you start looking at the solar return chart within the solar return chart itself, we want to see what aspects does the solar return ascendant pick up and what do those planets rule within the solar return chart. And if you go back and forth in that way, you'll start to identify a theme, and that theme begins to lay out the groundwork for whatever concrete interpretation you're going to give for the coming year.
So exciting. I'll have to come get a solar return reading through Oraculos this year.
You most definitely should. And for anyone who's interested in getting a solar return reading at Oraculos, please do feel free to visit our website, check out our services page. And one of the cool things about Oraculos is that we are absolutely a teaching institution. And so the students at Oraculos who've either graduated from this solar return section of their training or who are currently in this solar return section of their training, those students are also the ones who are co-interpreting those charts so that when you get a reading at Oraculos, you get not only my input, which is the guiding input that everyone follows at Oraculos, but you also receive the insights of a group of students who've also gone through this training themselves so that you get the most comprehensive reading experience possible. And so please do feel free to check out that offering on our website. And also on our website, we have students at Oraculos, our senior students at Oraculos, who are giving readings there as well. So if you want to find out for yourself what the outcome of an Oraculos education looks like, please feel free to go and book a reading with one of our students at Oraculos under the natal consultation section. Any of the students who are giving readings through the Oraculos website are students who I trust wholeheartedly to provide you a quality astrological consultation. So please do feel free to go and check that out at your nearest convenience. And ultimately, if you are interested in studying at Oraculos and becoming an extraordinary astrologer, then please do go and check out our upcoming Foundations of Classical Astrology program that begins this September 2022. FOCA is where we lay down the groundwork of everything you need, not just to know astrology, but to be an astrologer, which are two completely different things. And at Oraculos, we train people to be thorough, good, systematic, as well as clear practitioners of astrology, which is a very important thing because there's a lot of ways astrology can get fuzzy. And at Oraculos, we demand excellence from the students who go through our programs, and all of the students who are here today and all of the students who have graduated from our programs are extraordinary astrologers in their own right. So if you want to become a part of our Oraculos legacy, please feel free to sign up for our Foundations of Classical Astrology program, which begins this coming September 2022. And you can find out all the information you need by not only clicking the link in the description of this video, but also by visiting our website at oraculosastrology.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you very soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.